Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, and this is a really random review, because this is a movie I haven't seen since it first came out, and I'm thinking about it off and on recently, wanting to check it out again, and that is The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I only picked this up because I was at a flea market yesterday, and I found it for $1, so I was like, yeah. This came out in 2005, so it's been 15 years since I've seen this. And I remember at the time, I thought it was kind of boring. Because, I was 14, so I was more into, by that time I was really into more 70s and 80s slasher films. Saw was already out at that point. That more of what I was into. I had seen the original Exorcist, which I liked. But I think why I found this boring at the time was because it's essentially two films. You have your possession exorcism movie, then you have your courtroom procedural drama. So anyone saying it's like a courtroom procedural thriller, not a horror movie, it's still a fucking horror movie. I've been meaning to make a video about how personal opinion doesn't dictate genre, but I'll get into that at some point. It's still a horror film. It's a supernatural horror film with the courtroom procedural mixed in with it. It was directed by Scott Derrickson, who, you can see what else he's done. Well, it says based on a true story. I think it's more so inspired by, because there's a difference between based on and inspired by. It's not based on a girl named Emily Rose. It's based on a girl named Anneliese Michel. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's a girl in Germany in the 1970s, where her cause of death did lead to a trial and a conviction of 2 priests in her family for negligent homicide, whereas in this, it's more so just the priest that's on trial. And I think a lot of the creative Hollywood stuff is more so the courtroom procedurals. But yeah, Scott Derrickson, just to look up other things he's done. Okay, he also directed Sinister. Hated it when I first saw it. Rewatching for my review, I wasn't as harsh as I thought. He did Deliver Us from Evil, which I haven't seen since it came out. Don't even remember what I thought of it. He did direct Doctor Strange, which, of the very few Marvel films, it is one that I liked. Also did Sinister 2, which I did not like. Oh, and he's going to be directing a sequel to Labyrinth, which is an 80s movie I never saw. I haven't seen a lot of fantasy films. Oh, he directed Hellraiser Inferno, the first of the really shitty non-Hellraiser movies. But it stars Laura Linney, who I like, which this is sort of a similar role to what she did in Primal Fear, which I really like. That's a psychological thriller. That's a psychological thriller that's a courtroom procedural. Very good movie. I believe that was Edward Norton's first movie. Tom Wilkinson, who I've seen in a lot of movies. I'll always know him as Falcone in Batman Begins. Campbell Scott, Mary Beth Hurt as the judge, and Jennifer Carpenter as Emily Rose, who most people will know as Deb from Dexter. She was also the lead in Quarantine. And, it was made fairly cheap. Well, $19 million, but it made $145.2, so it was a big hit. And if I'm not mistaken, this might have been the start of like that resurgence in possession and exorcism movies. With, of all of those, The Last Exorcism was a movie I was actually impressed by. I still don't really like it, but I liked it enough, more than I thought I would, up until the piece of shit ending. Taking of Deborah Logan, I liked. Still haven't seen Autopsy of Jane Doe. But there is a bunch of those Exorcism of insert girl's name that came out after this. In fact, around this time, there was 2 prequels to The Exorcist, both of which were bad. Exorcist the Beginning and Dominion. I don't remember which one I saw back then, but whichever one I saw was terrible, and I think the other one was just as bad. But this, so yeah, when I first saw it, I thought it was kind of boring. I just wanted to see the Emily Rose stuff. Now, rewatching it now, I actually do like courtroom films. I do. I like movies like Primal Fear. I think that's a very good movie. Not too many's coming to mind right now. But it basically opens up with, this one doctor, Cartwell, I believe was the character's name, showing up to the Rose family farm out in the middle of nowhere. Which this kind of reminds me of The Last Exorcism. Because even when Jennifer Carpenter is doing her demonic faces, kind of looks like the girl from The Last Exorcist. And it is a family farm out in the middle of nowhere. I'm pretty sure it could even be inspired by the same... Which actually, let me just look that up real quick. But anyway, this doctor shows up, and it's announced that she's dead. And I just want to type that. Okay, so Father Moore, who's played by Tom Wilkinson, he is arrested and charged with negligent homicide. And I just want to see if The Last Exorcism is inspired by... Actually, it doesn't even say. Okay, so whatever. And basically, we have these 2 different lawyers. The prosecutor's who's this guy named Ethan Thomas, played by Campbell Scott. He's a man of faith, but he's also considered to be, like a savage in the courtroom. He's really good at tearing people down. Then you have Laura Linney, who is chosen because she's very ambitious. She's had, this one win with, I guess, this guy that should not have gotten off, but she did get him off. But she's agnostic. She doesn't really have any faith. And the prosecution wants Father Moore to plead guilty. That way it doesn't become a big trial, very little attention. But he's not interested in jail time or freedom. He wants Emily's story told, no matter what the cost. Of course, he doesn't want to go to jail. But that's his biggest concern, is that Emily's story is told and that he gets to testify. And so the present time is in the courtroom, and all Emily's story is told through flashbacks. Which she was this really sweet, young girl from a farm who got a scholarship to go away to become a teacher. And while she was away in school, she started becoming possessed. And we really only get one scene, which would be the first scene when she gets her scholarship, of her completely normal. So we don't really get to see the complete descent, sort of like in the director's cut of, well, it's not really the director's cut, but like the long version of The Exorcist, where we get a lot of Reagan before she gets possessed, as opposed to the house party when she pisses on the floor being the opening. But I was okay with that. And so we see her story through flashbacks. And one thing that's really interesting is because whoever's on the stand, whether it be like a doctor, which the prosecution is trying to prove that she is mentally ill, no, she is epileptic, which the girl in real life was, and that it's all what the hell is it I want to say? It was all because this priest put faith and negligence over medical science, telling her not to take these epileptic pills and whatnot. So when we see through flashbacks, Emily's, doing all the possessed body contortions and her eyes going black and voices. When the doctors are on the stand talking about symptoms of epilepsy and all these other things, we see the scene again, but told in such a way that it's not like a possession. So like when we see, like the first time she gets possessed, she's like in the bed with kids talking about how she felt this demon was on top of her. And we see like the bed being pushed down and her writhing and whatnot. But then when the doctors on the stand talk about symptoms, we see the scene again, but it looks as if she's doing it herself. Like it's the epileptic seizure or grand mal seizure that's doing all that to her. So several scenes we get to see twice, with whether it be told through possession or told through this is what happens when she goes through these episodes, which I thought was kind of interesting. Kind of reminded me of that Val Kilmer movie Wonderland, which is based on a true story, about how when we get the two statements from Val Kilmer and I can't remember his name, but the guy from the gang, they tell the same story but in a different way, so the same things happen but under different circumstances. It's kind of like that in a sense, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so yeah, she was treated for epilepsy. She was given this one drug. Father Moore said, you shouldn't take it. And of course, the prosecutor and Laura Linney, the defense attorney, it's not like they're really going at it. It doesn't really have that sort of... I don't really know how I want to word that. They don't really share glances or like, oh yeah, great show today, huh? It doesn't go that route. The ending is a very Hollywood ending, I will say that. But eventually, Father Moore is able to tell Emily's story. I'm stammering because I just watched it. I probably should have read more up on it before I started. And yeah, I got a comment on one of my last videos about how I have no personality and how I come off as slow because of how I sometimes stutter and pause. Well, I don't script these things, so whatever. And it does make a note about how it all starts at 3 a.m., which is like the witching hour. And of course, the prosecutor is a man of faith, but he says he's a man of facts as well. At one point, there's this one doctor, which when the film opens up, he's the doctor that examines her body, see what the cause of death was, which essentially is malnutrition. That's what it was in the real life case. He agrees to testify, but then doesn't show up, and he was like the ace in the hole for winning this case. But of course, when the Father Moore goes to tell the story, of course he sounds like nonsense. He's talking about apparitions and ghosts and demons. It becomes a mockery in the newspapers. The superiors to Laura Linney are telling her if she puts him on the stand again, she'll be fired. And she only took this case because if she wins, she gets to be senior partner, which is what she's been striving for. Which, of course, foreshadows the ending. If you know how Hollywood works and foreshadowing, you know where the ending to this is going to go. And one thing I probably didn't pick up on the first time I saw this, but liked in this, was when we see her possessed, of course she's talking in all these different languages. Latin, Aramaic, German. So, of course, all, like, the bodily contortions, the dilated pupils, it's all kind of debunked when, like, the doctors are talking about symptoms of her conditions. And then her speaking in all these languages. The prosecutor's like, well, when she was in college, she took these electives for foreign language, which was German, Latin, and they did offer Aramaic. So it was possible that she could have learned all this stuff. So by seeing two different scenes of, okay, we're seeing it as if she's possessed, we're seeing it as if it's, a medical condition taken over, like symptoms of it. And then with these explanations of how, well, everything we're seeing is also coincides with the medical aspect, it really does lead up to speculation. It does sort of give us, I don't want to say it gives us the choice or it's left ambiguous, but I guess sort of like the real story and other stories of exorcisms and stuff. It's like, because also at the very end, when they give their closing statements, the prosecutor talks about, it's a fact that he is negligent and whatever. Then Laura Linney says, can we prove God exists or the devil exists? No. Can we prove, is this a fact? Is that a fact? No. But, is it possible? Is it possible that this could have happened? Is it possible? So, I don't want to say it leaves it ambiguous, but I do like that aspect of it showing us the scene, and because there's also the part that's on the cover, the morning of the day she died, where she goes outside, she hears these voices, she goes out to the tree, and she has this sort of disembodied experience where she felt touched by the hand of God and talked to by the Virgin Mary, which this scene is read to us by Father Moore on the stand in a letter from Emily that he got, I believe he said the morning of the day she died. So he's reading, so this is all from a letter that Emily wrote to him that he's reading on the stand. And she essentially saying she felt the touch of God, and she was given the choice of, you can give up now and come up with us to heaven, or you can stay and suffer, and this will be your fate. And she chooses to stay. And then we see, before she goes back to her body, she has the stigmata marks on her hands and feet. So they talk about stigmata, and then the prosecution talks about how there's a barbed wire fence, which we see her gripping onto, which could lead to the wounds. So I like how there's that, two possibilities. It is possible it happened that way. It is possible it happened this way. It's not as cut and dry. I'm sure you can look at it that way. But, and then of course he's found he is found guilty, but the jury decides to commute it to time served. So he's guilty, but he's able to be free. Which, in the real life case, 2 priests in the family were found guilty and sentenced to... It was a sentence less than 10 years, and then it was like 3 years probation and a fine. So, and then, of course, the big Hollywood ending, which I didn't care for, was, you know, her superiors, which was about ready to fire her, is now like, hey, it's a win, you know. He was found guilty, but he got away free. You know, that's still a win. We'd like to make you a senior partner. And she's like, you know, she's sort of learned something through all this. So she decides not to take the partnership. Like, she's overcome that part of her ambitions and learned something, I guess. That kind of Hollywood ending, which I didn't really care for. It felt a little cliche. I'm probably leaving a lot out during this review, but I haven't really seen a horror movie like this in some time. One that really is a courtroom trial procedural and a horror film. I've seen more, obviously, but it's been a while. I've been watching a lot of Blumhouse films lately. But I think it's all very well acted, and there is some nice camera work. Sometimes it does have a feel of like a classic, you know, the score has sort of like a classic gothic sort of haunted house kind of score. Like, I think it was the father's talking about one of his nights during the witching hour where he runs downstairs and runs outside and sees the robed demonic figure. And it's got like this GoPro kind of angle as he's running downstairs, and this kind of classic gothic-y organ type score is playing over it. Or some of the scenes where she's writhing and contorting on the floor, you get some nice smooth camera work around her. Jennifer Carpenter did a great job playing Emily Rose. I mean, she had to do a lot of screaming, and she wasn't afraid to really do a lot of what could look silly in any other movie. I mean, she really went for it. I've always liked Laura Linney. I like Tom Wilkinson. Everyone did a really good job with the acting. The pacing, I mean, it's 2 hours and 1 minute. I feel it went at a good pace. I mean, I love horror movies, but I also do like courtroom procedurals, so this might not be for everyone. I didn't like it when I first saw it, but rewatching it again and seeing more movies of this kind, like The Exorcism of, or The Possession of, this is probably the best of its kind as far as movies like that. I do like Deborah Logan. I liked The Last Exorcism more than I thought I would up until the ending, but I could say this movie's a lot better than how I remembered it. And the best part about it would probably be the cast. You know, all the performances are there. I really liked Jennifer Carpenter, especially when she's doing all the contorting and the demonic shit. I still see her as Deb from Dexter. But, yeah. No, I don't really have too much to say about it, but, yeah. I say that at almost 25 minutes in. But, Exorcism of Emily Rose is a lot better than how I remembered it. And I know this has not been a very good review. I stopped and paused and stuttered quite a bit. I know I'm going to get made fun of for it, but that's the internet. So, anyway, Exorcism of... Yeah, I just gave myself shit for it. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I can say I enjoyed it enough. But there it is, and thank you for watching.